Renegade Broadcasting. Hard-hitting talk radio.
Good evening, everyone. You're listening to Renegade Broadcasting at renegadebroadcasting.com. This is January 8th, 2018. I'm your host, Richard Kadokevich, and this is Arcane Semantics. Well, I'm very pleased to announce I have a very innovative and beneficial gentleman to have share his insights with you today. He's an inventor and a natural health educator from Smyrna Beach, Florida, and that is Ken Rohla. Hello, Ken. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Richard. Am I coming through okay?
Yes, you sound great. I just wanted to mention a little more introduction here. Ken specializes in rejuvenation and cellular regeneration using raw and sprouted vegetarian food, herbs, food-based natural supplements, detoxification, emotional healing, reprogramming of limited unconscious beliefs, ancient esoteric healings, and cutting-edge science. Formerly educated in electrical engineering and computer science, Ken worked for 23 years in the medical industry, from the patient level, drawing blood in hospital emergency rooms, to the national policy level, showing healthcare executives how to implement technology as a computer operations manager for the North Carolina Hospital Association. In 1993, at the age of 32, Ken was first exposed to natural healing in a search to cure severe hypoglycemia and other health problems he had acquired from a lifetime of poor diet and lifestyle. 8 years and many thousands of dollars later, after trying a litany of diets, products, potions, and pills, Ken found permanent success with living food, nutrition, and detoxification. After repeated requests from friends to share, pardon me, folks. After numerous requests from friends to share his research and what he learned, Ken began teaching workshops on detoxification and rejuvenation in 2003, and demanded for his services had exploded. A cutting-edge researcher, Ken had studied with many pioneers in the science and natural health movement. Well, Ken, thank you so much. I know I've spoken with you in the past. I was on a different broadcasting network. It switched over for various reasons since then. You know how all that goes. But I'm very happy to introduce you to the listeners here, and I'm sure they'd love to hear a lot of what you have to cover. I'm just blown away, really, by all the topics you sent me again, that you do cover. But
yeah,
thank you
an
again.
interesting life.
Very much so. Yeah, and I mean, you seem like you've had so much inside witness testimonial that you can give. I mean, you mentioned, for example, just I don't know, just some of your work has even been suppressed. So I don't want to say more than you are, feeling comfortable at this point with some of those issues from your past. But certainly, we'd love to hear about that technology as well.
Sure, yeah, I can talk about the technologies I've worked with, no problem. But most definitely, yes, it depends on where you want to get started because there's so many things we can talk about.
Yes, yeah. I mean, last time we tried to center around the topics of reverting GMOs. I'd like to get into that a bit again because that's fascinating. I mean, I've never really encountered that elsewhere before. Reverting GMOs and also neutralizing radiation, and a bit of what you have to say on geoengineering. And maybe we can branch out from there.
Okay.
But first, this reverting of GMOs. It's something that you're saying that the living organism itself can be changed.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can heal DNA, and I know for a fact because I've done it with myself and with other clients over the years. And what I've discovered in that process over the years is that, we're taught that our genetic blueprint is in the DNA. And actually, the DNA is a superconducting antenna that conveys the genetic blueprint into the physical structures of the body. But the actual origin of the blueprint is in consciousness of the organism itself. So the consciousness of the organism has the genetic pattern built into it. And therefore, when you have the DNA has been damaged or mutated and has changed its expression, there are things that you can do to restructure it back to health, and then the original blueprint will come through and you will see radical changes in the physiology of the organism. For example, plants. This is how I first discovered this. I met some guys years ago who were feeding GMO and hybridized plants these special minerals that were known as monatomic elements or monatomic minerals. And when they are metabolized by the plant or any organism, they create superconductivity in the body, and in particular in the DNA, which raises the superconductivity in the DNA, which allows it to pick up the signal from the consciousness of the organism and convey it into the genetic blueprint of the physical body. And so by feeding plants or animals or microbes or whatever, anything that's been genetically engineered or genetically altered from its original pattern, when you raise the superconductivity in DNA, then what happens is the DNA will unravel, it will restructure, the body will change. And in the case of these plants, these GMO varieties mutated within a few weeks to unmutated, back to their original forms with radical changes in coloring and structure. So, for example, some squash that were striped, red and white striped squashes, and it wound up in a few weeks losing their colors, changing their genetic structure, and changing the physical look of the fruits and the plants. And so that was the beginning of my exposure to the idea that we could do this. And so then I started experimenting by feeding monoatomic minerals to microbes, to fermented ferments, and to human beings and animals, and found the same thing, that we can heal our DNA with this. And these minerals occur naturally in plants and in herbs and foods and things. So in particular in foods that are grown in organic soil, because it turns out that volcanic minerals, volcanic ash, are very high in these monoatomic elements, and they can be released when they're metabolized by the plants. So simply by taking volcanic rock powders and feeding them to plants, or fermenting them and breaking them down in various ways. You can either ferment them or you can vortex them in water and magnetic fields and break them down into the monoatomic forms, which the plants can then uptake, or the animals. And And that's how you can do this very simply and very inexpensively. So you can undo the genetic damage that has been done by all this manipulation.
So, you mentioned this for plants, or I'm sorry, did you mention animals?
You can do it with any living organism, anything that's got DNA. You can do it with microbes. You can do it with plants. You can do it with animals and people. You basically feed them foods that are high in these monoatomic elements, and the DNA will be healed and will revert back to its original form.
Okay, wow, so it's like a self-cleansing that the monoatomic elements they allow for this superconductivity, but it's a natural process that the body has.
Exactly, and it's actually a natural process that occurs even if you don't feed these organisms these monoatomics. It will happen over time, although typically it's over multiple generations of the organism. So, for example, there was an experiment done with fruit flies that were genetically engineered to be blind, and after 7 generations of reproducing, they got their eyesight back. And so it's kind of like this built-in safety mechanism of the universe, that the genetic patterns for all these living organisms are in an energetic structure that can't be destroyed. And so however much we muck up the genetics on this planet, eventually it will revert back to its original form if we just leave it alone. But in the case of people or animals or plants, if we want to heal them up within the single generation of one plant, you can feed them these monoatomics and in their natural forms, and it will heal the plant immediately within a few weeks typically, or the person.
Oh, yeah, because we hear otherwise people, if they do have I know, like, through the pollen being spread through the wind and that sort of thing, it's hard to stop the contamination of the GMOs, but people will burn, they'll burn their fields and wait 3 years or something like that, they thought, at minimum, or was it, or that they previously thought was the minimum way to remove it from an area of land?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know, but I certainly know faster ways to remediate land than that. I mean, you can, one of the topics that I teach on a lot is how to remediate polluted soil and water and the atmosphere from damage from nuclear fallout and from GMOs and poisons of all kinds. And basically, you can use microbes is one way, particularly with soil. You can use microbes, like there's a mixture that I sell called Effective Microorganisms, or EM, and it was developed by a Japanese agriculture professor named Teruo Higa. And Higa discovered that these microbes, he was experimenting actually for agricultural purposes to try and develop a single microbe that could be used to enhance plant growth for agricultural production. And he tried for many years and was unsuccessful. And then in disgust, he finally admitted failure, and he threw away all of his experiments with all these different microbes on a compost pile. And after he did that, the compost pile just exploded with life and with growth. And what he discovered was that it was a symbiotic mixture of microbes that created this synergy amongst the microbes that allowed them to break down toxins and to break down nutrients that were locked up in soil and in rocks and deliver them to plants. And so he developed that into this product called Effective Microorganisms. It goes by different brand names, but the great thing is it's dirt cheap. It's like a quart of this stuff is about $25, and you can take a quart of that and mix it with 5 gallons of water and a quart of blackstrap molasses, and you can ferment your own in about 3 weeks. And then once you've got that, the great thing about it is this stuff is used in extremely dilute form, so like a tablespoon per gallon of water. So you spray this on land or on crops, and it will break down toxins in the soil. If it's been chemically farmed or genetically engineered crops have been grown there or whatever, and those microbes will eat it and break it down into non-toxic elements. Because that's part of what microbes and parasites and pathogens' job is in nature, is to break down toxins. And so so you can heal soil that way. You can also do it with water, and there are other ways of remediating water, particularly large bodies of water as well. But Chihuahua has been doing this for many years, taking large groups of people out to large bodies of water and mixing these microbes into balls of mud and just throwing the balls of mud out into lakes and rivers or whatever. And then the microbes will break down all the poisons and toxins and remediate the water and make it clean again. And so you can do this with land very inexpensively. And so all of these problems that we have on this planet, it turns out the solutions, from what I've seen, are very inexpensive and easy to do. And they just basically mimic what nature is already doing, just accelerates it.
And I'm sure this information would be suppressed, if at all possible, by all these mega corporations, because their patents for all these GMOs are really a lot of what's driving their industry, right? I mean, and I don't know. I mean, the Monsanto employees I know have a cafeteria that's completely free of any it's completely organic, non-GMO.
Exactly.
So, that so I mean, it's not just. I really should back up there a minute, because no, I mean, that's just one aspect, really, the patentability, just like the pharmaceutical industry. But there's also a lot of harm they're finding that these consuming GMO plants can do to people. Isn't that right?
Oh, absolutely. There have been studies done showing that GMOs cause all kinds of damage in the body, including DNA damage. And most recently, a couple of years ago, there was a French team that showed that GMO food will cause tumors and cancer in the GI tracts of rats. And of course, I believe it was Monsanto or one of the gene giants sued them. And, they had to spend a lot of money defending themselves and ultimately won. But these companies try to produce junk science and lie about what's going on so that they can keep people confused about the nature of these things. And so there's most definitely that going on. I mean, I've encountered that quite a lot over the years because I've worked with a lot of technologies that are paradigm changing. And in fact, talking about these remediating the soil, and these monoatomics, I met some guys who developed a product that's basically a soap. It's really interesting because it on the surface it would appear just to be a normal soap. It's made out of 6 very common herbs, a couple of ferns and peppermint and chocolate and a few other things. And but they've done something energetically very interesting to it, and I'm not sure what it is because it's proprietary. But you take a little bit of this stuff, maybe a tablespoon per gallon, mix it with water, and spray it on soil, and it will break down the minerals in the soil into monoatomic and angstrom particles. Angstrom particles are just particles of a few atoms of the mineral in them, and the monoatomics are individual atoms, which according to conventional science is impossible virtually. But in fact, it happens all the time in nature. And when plants can't suck boulders up through their roots, they have to consume particles that are angstrom or monoatomic in size. And so when you do this, particularly if you put down rock powders that are volcanic and are already high in monoatomics hiding within them, and then you use either microbes or use this material, this soap, to break them down, then what it does is releases these monoatomics in the soil, and the plants uptake them. Then they get phenomenal growth and phenomenal resistance to disease. You don't need to use chemical fertilizers, et cetera, et cetera. So when they developed this product, they developed it for agriculture, and they discovered it had a lot of other uses as well, but they developed it for agriculture, and they thought, hey, we've developed this amazing product that will solve all of our problems with chemical farming, et cetera, et cetera. They went to big agriculture, and immediately the gene giants and the chemical companies tried to kill them. And so they had to go into hiding, and now are very skittish and won't they're selling it for other purposes, but they don't sell it for agricultural purposes, and they don't advertise that. And that's why I can't name the product, because these guys have actually had multiple attempts on their lives. But I do, when I'm talking, when I do talks about growing food stuff, I do mention these products kind of surreptitiously. so that people can access them and use them. But basically, yeah, that's the reality of our world now, is that, we have corporations that are so wealthy and so powerful, they do not want their apple carts upset. And when a paradigm changing technology comes along that could serve humanity and even save humanity, they will attack it and destroy it if they can.
Ken, I have a yes, yeah, certainly. Ken, I have a question from someone in the live chat. Urban Jungle Girl asks, is the guest referring to Miracle 2 soap? Have you heard of Miracle 2 soap?
Yes, I have heard Miracle 2 soap. I use it and I love it, but it is not that soap. If you go to YouTube and search on Ken Rohla food and thought, you can find a video there about me talking about growing nutrient dense food, and that will have all these various tricks that I know of for growing nutrient dense food, and it's mentioned in there, although not specifically on what it can do. And but to give you an idea of what kinds of things you can do with this, I mean, I use these kinds of things here at my house. I do what I call high ORMES growing. ORMES is an acronym, ORMES or MORMUS. It's an acronym for orbitally rearranged monoatomic elements, which is just a phrase that someone coined for these elements. And when you know how to grow with this stuff, I'm in the middle of wintertime here in Florida, which is warmer than the rest of the country, but we've still had a few nights that were freezing lately. And I've got tomato plants growing in my greenhouse that are 10 feet tall, and they'll probably get another 3 or 4 feet before they max out, but they're just loaded with fruit. And this is the way that, I grow food, and this is the way that we can all grow food and have massive amounts of food in small spaces. And this is what, the big agriculture concerns don't want people to know about.
And then, well, let's see. You also mentioned, in addition to ORMES, the term ORMES, homeopathics, that you describe as water-containing superconducting interdimensional monoatomic elements.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, these minerals are not normal matter. That's the thing that makes them so weird. And it's also what makes mainstream science poo-poo them. Although in my experience, the military and the intelligence agencies know all about this stuff. But they're not just regular three-dimensional physical minerals. They are multidimensional matter, and they're superconducting, and they have a lot of weird properties. And so they can exhibit anti-gravity. They exist simultaneously in different dimensions or frequencies of time and space. And so they actually connect non-physical reality with physical reality, so to speak. And within the body, they actually are the interface between the mind and consciousness and the physical body. So you hear doctors talk about the mind-body connection. Well, if there really is a mind-body connection, then there has to be an interface somewhere between the energetics of consciousness and the physical structures of the body. And it turns out it's where these monoatomic elements are deposited in the brain neural pathways and in the DNA and along the nervous system in these junctures of minerals that correlate to the acupuncture meridians. Turns out that these minerals, because they're superconducting, they create little minute black holes within the body that act as portals for the energy of consciousness to flow in and out of physicality. And that's why, in Chinese medicine and in Ayurveda, they talk about the flow of the qi through the meridians or the flow of prana through the nadis. That's what you're talking about, is these deposits of superconducting minerals throughout the body. They create this web of basically black holes within the body. And this energy of consciousness, which is superluminal light, it's light energy or photonic energy that's traveling way beyond what we've been told is the speed of light. And so it appears invisible or dark to us. And so physicists call it dark matter or dark energy or whatever, but it's really superluminal light. And this energy flows through galaxies. It flows through everything, kind of like the Force in Star Wars. When you look at matter, and you start looking at the atomic and subatomic particles of matter, basically the whole structure of the atoms we've been taught in school is wrong, fundamentally flawed. But it's known that when you look at the subatomic level, you mostly are looking at space. You've got these particles separated by large amounts of space. So, for example, if you blow up a hydrogen atom to the size of a football field, the nucleus would be about the size of a golf ball, and the electrons spinning around it would be about the size of a pea. So it's mostly space, but it's not empty. It's full of this superluminal light that's flowing through the cosmos. And this energy, I liken it to God consciousness because it has an intelligence behind it, and it flows from the centers of galaxies, and it spirals as it goes, and it branches as it goes. So it's spiraling and fractaling as it goes throughout the cosmos. And as it turns out, it's relayed through the suns and the planets in the cosmos, because it's been discovered that by people like Nassim Haramein and others, that suns and planets have singularities or black holes at their centers. And so these act as like these interdimensional portals where this energy flows. And so this energy itself is multidimensional. It's not just existing in physical reality. It exists in other frequencies of existence that we would term non-physical. But it's flowing through this whole web of the universe, through these planets and suns. And when it comes to us, it's coming down from our sun, and it's coming up from the center of the earth, which is why you have these practices like Tai Chi and Qigong and these kinds of things where you're using your consciousness combined with your physical body to draw up this energy from the earth up through the root chakras and down from above from the sun into the crown chakra and the other chakras. What this is really about is directing this energy using your consciousness, which is this form of energy. The scientists now are calling this energy scalar energy or scalar waves. There's other names for it, orgone or chi or prana or 0 point energy. There's a lot of different names for it, but it's basically superluminal light. And turns out that the human body is an antenna for this energy. We pick it up and rebroadcast it in a localized field in the same way that planets and suns do. And actually, it turns out that the entire cosmos is this web of these black holes within all these structures, relaying this energy outward and spiraling and branching as it goes. And so within our own bodies, we've got this web of these black holes in the acupuncture meridians, in the DNA, in the brain neural pathways. And so that's where the mind-body connection happens. These monoatomic minerals make it possible. And so if you understand that, you can feed these monoatomics to people, to animals, to plants, to microbes, and it will radically improve their health because Dr. Thomas Bearden discovered Thomas Bearden was a NASA nuclear engineer who was a brilliant man who was an expert in scalar physics, but he also was studying how human cells regenerate and discovered that they actually send a scalar wave signal through these monoatomic elements in the body back in time and get the pattern for the healthy cell from the consciousness of the organism from the past, and then bring it into the present to restructure the DNA and restructure the cells into healthy cells. And so when you understand this, you can, like I said, feed these monoatomics to people, to plants, to microbes, radically improve their health, radically improve their growth. And in the case of farming or gardening, you can feed them to your plant and you get crazy growth, crazy nutrient-dense food. And it's not some kind of chemical abomination. It's just basically doing what nature already does, just giving it more of it.
And you mentioned ORMES, ORMES, monoatomic minerals, and ORMES. There are implications for free energy as well. You mentioned healing and even space time travel.
Yeah, and I know this all sounds crazy and bizarre and nutty, but when you start, I started working with free energy technologies back in the early 90s, and when you start working with these kind of very advanced technologies and advanced physics, you start bumping into scientists and people that are working with it. And so I've met military scientists and government scientists working with the NSA and the CIA, and they all know about this stuff. And in fact, a lot of them have come out and publicly talked about this stuff. Dr. Fred Bell, for example, was the architect of the United States military's energy weapons program, and he didn't like where it was going. He saw that they were developing these weapons that could destroy an entire continent with one shot, because it can alter matter. And so he came out on Jesse Ventura's TV show Conspiracy Theory, and he laid out all the details of it. And within 12 hours, he was dead. And Jesse Ventura went to Mexico and went into hiding. And this is, Jesse Ventura is a former governor of Minnesota, and he was afraid for his life.
Yeah.
So, these kinds of secrets are at the deepest levels of state secrets. And but these technologies are being used. And so I'm working with free energy and started getting exposed to a lot of these things and seeing things that I didn't believe were possible based on what I was taught in engineering school. And I started to realize very quickly that what I was taught in engineering school was at best incomplete and really fundamentally flawed. And so over the years, I was exposed to more and more kinds of technologies, and wound up ultimately meeting 3 different people that were completely unrelated, who were scientists that had worked on anti-gravity, time-traveling flying saucers, in 2 cases for the U.S. military. One was a relative of a man named T. Townsend Brown, who it just so happened was a client of mine when I was teaching natural health and was taking on individual clients. This is kind of how things work with me. I kind of get these spirit tricks where things kind of come to me. So I had this client who was a relative of T. Townsend Brown, and T. Townsend Brown is known for his work with anti-gravity, and turns out he had developed a bunch of anti-gravity time-traveling flying saucers reportedly for the U.S. military. And then on another occasion, through some serendipitous events, I also met the CEO of a company called Searle Magnetics, which was a company that I had known about that developed a free energy generator using some very special magnets arranged in a certain way in a generator. And I knew that worked because I had witnessed it in use. But what I didn't know until I met the CEO privately, and he showed me pictures of anti-gravity flying saucers that they had developed. And they have the capability of time travel as well, and many other things. They can neutralize radioactivity and all kinds of stuff. And then I also met a scientist years ago who worked at Los Alamos Labs, and he had developed an anti-gravity time-traveling flying saucer with some colleagues of his. And what was interesting was that I met all 3 of these people at very different times in my life, and none of them were connected. None of them knew each other. And yet they all told the exact same stories on how these technologies worked. And the monoatomics fitted very prominently in there because they can create superconductivity. For example, with a flying saucer, you basically create a black hole at the center of the craft. In the case of the Searle Magnetics motor, it uses these special magnets in rings, concentric rings that are spinning in opposite directions, and that will actually open up a black hole. And inside of a black hole, you have no mass, you have no inertia, no drag, no momentum. And so these things, when you can expand this black hole so that it surrounds the entire ship, and when the entire ship is inside of a black hole and there's no mass, there's no drag, there's no inertia, etc., you can be going 60,000 miles an hour and it feels like you're sitting still. So these ships can actually go faster than the human eye can see. And I've been told by several of these people that they have 2 different modes of operation where they can propel, if they're traveling in the Earth's atmosphere, they can propel themselves very rapidly, moving forward. But if they need to do interstellar travel, they can basically just open up a black hole and blink out of here and show up somewhere else in time and space. And so, for most people, that just sounds like science fiction and nonsense. But, I've had conversations with people who work in the military and intelligence communities, and it's kind of known within those circles, at least in some of those circles, that this has been occurring for quite a while. For decades, probably since World War II at least, if not before. So this is the reality that we're living in, and most people will not come out publicly and talk about it, because when you do, you just sound like a kook and people label you and make fun of you. I don't care about that. It doesn't bother me if people make fun of me or whatever. But if you get too public with some of these secrets, you will get hurt or killed. And I've had friends murdered, and I've had friends hurt who had developed solutions like free energy technologies for the planet, and they were out, getting too public with it. And I've developed technologies that I've gotten too public with, and I've had death threats and had to back off as well. So that's the reality that we're living in now. And this is why, when people say, well, if we've got these technologies, why aren't everybody using them? It's because you have to think about it just from a military perspective. Forget about everything else. Forget about destroying the petrodollar and the petrodollar based economy and the oil based economy. Just from a military standpoint, if you develop a technology that's hundreds or thousands of years beyond what's currently available to the mainstream, are you going to release it, or are you going to keep it to your advantage? Normally, the military keeps it to their advantage. They don't release it for the benefit of society. They want to keep it as a military advantage. And of course, it actually goes far beyond that. As anybody who's followed these whistleblowers who are coming out from secret space programs, they're coming out now and saying that we've got more motivations than simply military objectives, because we've got these secret space programs using these advanced technologies, some of which have been reverse engineered from extraterrestrial craft that have been found or captured or whatever. And so they're not just using these for military advantages, they're actually making these technologies and going out into space with them, and have been for decades. And so there are a lot bigger agendas here than just the profit motive and the military advantage angle.
Absolutely. Did you feel like you could, since you brought it up a bit, go a bit into your work in the early '90s with the type of fuel you were mentioning in your notes?
Yeah, we can talk about that. I worked with a man named Yull Brown, Yull Brown, and he was a brilliant man. He had probably followed the work of a man named William A. Rhodes, who back in the early '60s developed a water fuel technology. And I don't know why he didn't develop it for a fuel, perhaps because he understood that he would be harmed if he tried to bring it out to the world as a fuel. So he brought it out to run welders that would weld much better than existing technologies. And I've actually used one of these welders, not one of William Rhodes, but one of Yull Brown's, because Yull Brown went up developing welders as well as a means to get the technology out into the marketplace. But these welders, basically what you do is take water and you put it in a vessel, like let's say a cylinder shape. And inside that cylinder, you have metal tubes that are made out of very specific alloy that have very specific dimensions of diameter and length. And then you pulse electricity through it at very specific frequencies in relation to the dimensions of those tubes. And what will happen is it will develop resonance, which is kind of like if you're strumming two guitars or playing two instruments close together and you're playing the exact same notes and frequencies, they will amplify each other. And so by creating this resonance, it creates an amplification of energy, and it actually brings energy in from other dimensions of time and space, which scientists call zero-point energy. And so you're not breaking any laws of physics, but you're able to split the H2O molecules into separate molecules and then recombine them into a different geometric configuration that people are calling HHO, or Brown's gas, or hydroxy, or other names. But basically you convert the liquid water into a gas that is a fourth phase of water. It's not liquid, it's not solid, and it's not steam. It's a gas, but it's a very different form of water gas. And it will ignite, and when it ignites, it actually implodes back into liquid water. And so you can run an engine on a vacuum using it that way, or you can mix it with fuels like gasoline and make it much more explosive, and therefore you can get a lot more power out of gasoline and therefore use less of it. And so Brown was touring around the United States and filling stadiums with 20,000 people, demonstrating this technology. And he also had several Department of Energy officials and Congress people come and witness the technology with testing equipment and everything hooked up to it, and was showing what this stuff would do. And he was attacked heavily. He was interfered with constantly. He tried to develop a distributor network, and that was interfered with completely. He could never do business because his communications and shipping and everything was being interfered with. He had several attempts on his life before he was finally given cancer, I was told by somebody close to him. And so he died, and the technology was not released to public. But you can go onto YouTube and you can actually search on Brown's gas, and you can see old videos of people talking about it that worked with him. And he'd also had he'd attracted a bunch of really brilliant inventors who had other earth-friendly technologies, like, for example, a refrigerant for air conditioners and freezers and fridges that worked far, far better and was non-toxic than the junk we're using now in refrigeration systems. And that was actually, I believe it was developed by the guy who developed the original Freon for DuPont. And I believe he got disgusted with them and came out with his own. And of course, that was attacked and suppressed as well. But at any rate, that was, my experience working with Ewell Brown. I actually got to witness the technology with teams of physicists and engineers. And I got to use one of the welders. He came out with about 2,000 of these water welders, and they were absolutely amazing. And you can see them on YouTube. If you search on water welder or Brown's gas welder, you can see these things. They'll melt anything to anything. I mean, when I tested one, you could weld wood to plastic or glass to metal, or just anything, because it reacted at the atomic level, and it would actually alter materials at the atomic level, and so you could change them and recombine them at the atomic level, and that's how you were able to weld anything to anything. And the flame looked like a normal blue welding torch flame, but you could pass your hand through it really quickly and it would feel cold. And when you were actually welding with it, you can see this on YouTube, when you were welding with it, it would actually precipitate liquid water off of it while you were welding. It's quite interesting. So that was the beginning, I would say, of me being introduced to a lot of exotic technologies, and that was the beginning of me questioning what I was taught in school.
And you, when you met the portion of your notes mentioning the work with Ewell Brown, you mentioned some of what you witnessed: high-level radioactive waste being neutralized, along with dozens of other witnesses, including Department of Energy officials, U.S. congressmen, scientists, engineers, and others.
Right.
And yeah, you mentioned the attacks on his life.
Yeah, you can actually go onto YouTube and search on Brown's gas radioactivity, and you can see a guy who worked closely with Brown talking about the specifics of it. But basically what you do is you can take a radioactive material and weld another material into it, and it will alter it at the atomic level and turn it into a different material, and that's non-radioactive. And so it's basically, I think it was aluminum and magnesium that they would weld with the radioactive elements, and they would become non-radioactive. So that was the case. There have been other, there actually, I talk about this a lot in my public speaking. There are actually 61 patents worldwide for methods for neutralizing radioactivity, 8 of them in Japan. We have the technologies and have had them for many decades for neutralizing radioactivity. But the problem is, if you release that kind of technology, number one, it would kill the nuclear power industry, which is just a justification for the nuclear weapons industry. And also, it would give the non-nuclear countries the ability to neutralize nuclear weapons, because some of these technologies are energy technologies that you could basically fly over a missile silo and neutralize the warhead. but also it
Hello?
would imply a physics that would completely alter the control paradigm on this planet, between the energy cartels and everything else. So those technologies, every time these patents get issued, the people are stifled and shut up. They're either threatened or they're killed. And so that's why, despite the fact that we've got them on the books, nobody's using them. And that information is kept very quiet. I knew about this, and there was a Japanese legislator he was an ambassador. He was a Japanese ambassador who was lobbying the Japanese legislature. They call it the Diet. He was lobbying them to do something about Fukushima not long after it happened. And so I emailed him and contacted him, and I said, well, look, here's all these technologies that can neutralize this stuff and clean it up. And I've witnessed one of them, so I know at least one of them works for sure. And he never responded. And he got my emails. I found out he got my emails, but he wouldn't respond. And I don't know why. I don't know if he was afraid to or what, but but that's the reality of what's going on this planet. Now, fortunately, increasingly, these kinds of technologies are getting out. At least the word of them is getting out because of various people who are brave enough to come out and talk about them and even produce them. Like, for example, Mehran Kesh, the former Iranian physicist who's now, I think, living in Belgium, I believe. He developed a technology he calls magnetic plasma technology that can provide free energy and do healing and all kinds of stuff. And of course, he's been heavily attacked and had attempts on his life, et cetera, et cetera. But he did it in a smart way. He released it simultaneously to hundreds of corporations and organizations and people. And he also has lots of, he's got YouTube videos and things showing people how to make free energy devices. And so even if they kill him, the technology's already out the bag. And so that's what's going on very quietly, is that people are developing these technologies and they're just using them. They're not necessarily, trying to bring them out to the marketplace. There are a lot of tinkerers and inventors who are just developing these technologies for themselves and using them. So that's how this stuff is going to change. In the past, it takes so much time and effort and money to develop these kinds of technologies that people want to get a return on their investment, obviously. And so in the past, people have tried to, get them on the market and make a bunch of money and be rewarded for their efforts. But unfortunately, that's not how it's going to come out. It's got to be given away. And so that's what's starting to happen now, is that these technologies are starting to be given away. If you just go on YouTube, for example, and search on free energy technologies, you'll see some legit technologies on there. There are a lot of hoaxes, of course, online, and some of that is intentional hoaxing done to obfuscate the truth. But they're out there, and you can build them. And I have witnessed them. There have been a few companies around that have developed water fuel cells that you could buy, but doesn't take long before they're off the market. So, but eventually it's going to change. And I think really where it's going to change is when the economics change on this planet, which I think is coming our way, because, with these cryptocurrencies that are evolving, right now they're just in their infancy, and people are using them more like investments than actual currencies. But eventually, when cryptocurrencies take hold, they bypass the banking systems and these financial control systems, because they allow people to trade and interact between each other without a middleman. And I think that will be, when you take away these people's money, then you take away their power. And so I think that's where we're going to see the real changes, is when the financial systems change.
Well, that certainly is something a lot of people have debated. I mean, I can see. I don't know. I was listening to a point of view of one of our hosts on the station last week. How there's so much in place now to constantly surveil us, monitor everything we do, control so much. Why would they want to let that collapse? They may always keep it near the brink of collapse. They may
Yeah, they
always
don't.
keep it. But we bail out the bankers so often. It's hard to believe that we'd ever see a change from that.
Exactly, and
So
that's just one of many indicators that the whole system and the whole paradigm in this planet is unsustainable. We're either going to destroy ourselves or things are going to have to change radically. And personally, I think that things will change radically because there's already evidence that I hear behind the scenes of these people losing their power and people being arrested. And even if wasn't going on, and just look at technology, how technology is evolving. We've got the democratization and the socialization of technology starting to occur, for example, with things like Uber and Airbnb and services like that, really out of financial necessity because the younger generations do not have the money and that their parents' generation had, and so they're having to figure out creative ways of doing more with less, and those creative ways involve doing what we should be doing already, which is sharing these expensive resources that consume a lot of our environmental resources. It's like a car is outrageously expensive, and most of the time it's sitting in your driveway. It's not, or sitting somewhere. It's not being used. If we had different economic systems and a different paradigm, we could be having all those things provided by a central government or a central authority, and we could just use them and share them, and everybody pays for them, but they would pay much, much less because the resources would be utilized fully. And that's where I think where we're headed. I think that the younger generation, I hear a lot of bad mouthing of the so-called millennial generation, but I think there are a lot of brilliant millennials that are coming up with these brilliant solutions that are just saying they're thumbing their nose at the status quo and they're just creating ways around it. Because part of the benefit of the internet is that it's developed this expectation that things should be free, that everything should be free. And I agree. I think everything should be free, that we should all collaborate and cooperate and provide for each other and sustain each other, and not necessarily in a communist or a socialist system, but a very different paradigm. What Jacques Fresco calls a resource-based society or resource-based economy.
Well, you do
And
need
so,
incentive, I suppose. I mean, people need incentive for their hard work at, perhaps the more skilled and, difficult to master roles in society. I mean, yeah, definitely there's something to be said for that. I'm sorry, what were you going to?
absolutely. Well, yeah, that's a very, very valid point. For people who are motivated to work hard, produce, and that kind of thing, they do deserve to be rewarded. And I don't think we'll see the elimination of money anytime soon, or the move to a socialist system, or a communist system. But interestingly, I heard there was a guy named Al Bielek. For anybody that wants to Google him, his last name is Bielek, Al Bielek. And I met Al Bielek in like 1995, and he was telling stories about being part of government time travel experiments in the Philadelphia experiment. And he had a lot of really fascinating stories to tell, and he supposedly had time traveled and done a bunch of stuff. And his stories were fascinating, but I had no idea of knowing if it was true until 2008, when I wound up meeting a friend of his who solicited me to help Al heal himself because he was damaged from his time travel. There's a long story behind his. You can go on YouTube or just Google his name and you can hear his story. But basically, he was a soldier in the Navy, or I should say a sailor in the Navy during World War II, when supposedly Tesla and Einstein were working on technologies to cloak a battleship from radar, and they accidentally cloaked the battleship from physical reality. They made it kind of blink out of 3D, even though it was kind of partially still here. It was partially in other dimensions of time and space. And supposedly Al Bielek and his brother and a bunch of other sailors were on the ship when it happened. So he's got a whole long interesting story about what happened with that. But from that experiment, supposedly it destabilized him in a way that he kept bouncing through time on occasion. And so when I was solicited to help him, supposedly he kept phasing out of 3D and was like becoming non-physical and then physical. And it was killing him. And so, it sounds weird enough, but I had I actually encountered some reptilian extraterrestrials who had told me a lot of things about technology. And one of the things that they said was that extraterrestrials and interdimensional beings used monoatomic gold for time travel and space travel because it remained the same through different dimensions of time and space. And so I attempted to get Al Bielek connected with some people that made some supplements with monoatomic gold, and but somebody kept interfering with the communications between us, and ultimately he died a few months later. But at any rate, he mentioned in some of his interviews, which you can see on YouTube, that he traveled to the 26th century on Earth, and we had solved a lot of the problems that we have. There was no more war. There was plenty of food and everything for everybody, and people didn't have to work for money. And so therefore the problems that they were having was that exactly what you're talking about, is that people had kind of lost their spark of life, and they were, subsisting on, their basic needs were taken care of, but people had kind of lost that drive that comes with struggle and achievement. So I don't know if there's any utopian form of existence, but certainly, having everything provided for us would not be the ideal either. And so, but I think at least, if we're headed in the direction of where we've got a collaborative and cooperative environment where we can share and produce and basically not have a fear-based system that we have now, and the control mechanisms that we have now of just a very small minority of people controlling everything, then we'll see a much better society.
Certainly. Just the way things are, we see more and more things automated, yet the unemployment numbers continue to rise. Then again, when people have jobs for certain tasks, we're still seeing a lot of high suicide rates, say in the workhouses in China and places like this. So
yeah, there's a huge disparity around the planet, and always has been. But also too, now you've got, I find it very interesting that you've got people like Bill Gates and Elon Musk who have come out now, and they're talking about providing a basic income to all these people that are going to lose their jobs from automation and robots. And the fact that Bill Gates is suggesting that makes me very leery of that idea. Although I think that...
Right. Here we have a break coming up. We'll be back in 3 minutes.
Herbs have been used by people since the dawn of time. When Rockefeller introduced allopathic medicine, many herbal remedies fell by the wayside as people put their faith in prescription pills, and the world just gets sicker. Here at Heathen Herbs, we look to the past and to nature for answers. We offer tinctures, magnesium skin cream, lip balm, tooth powder, colloidal silver throat spray, and more. Check us out at heathenherbs.com.
Oh, heal sleepless nights, be merciful. I have found myself lost amongst the shards of a world reduced to shadow, sentenced to a lifetime in this prison. Well, I should have taken this omen and ride abandoned myself to secret corners.
You're listening to Renegade Broadcasting.
Well, Ken, before the break, you were mentioning some of this universal income, basic income, and some of the people who've been proponents of it.
Yeah, you can go on YouTube and see Elon Musk and Bill Gates and somebody else, Richard Branson, I think, talking about providing a basic, not even really, I wouldn't say an income maybe big enough to live off of, because I think they were mentioning numbers that were too low for that, but basically providing everybody that's displaced, if not everybody in the world, at least the people that are displaced by automation and robots in the coming years, and to have a basic income provided to them. And so, that it all depends on the intention of, behind it as to whether or not that could be a good thing. It also depends on how it's implemented. But I think Elon Musk was saying that would occur over, decades, that it wouldn't be overnight. And there are some governments that are testing that out right now, but I don't think they're doing it in a way that's really sustainable, because they're basically just taking low-income people and throwing some money at them and not giving them any financial guidance or training and in managing finances and stuff. And so it'll be interesting to see. But the fact that Bill Gates is recommending that makes me very skeptical of the agenda behind that, the fact that they're publicizing that idea. It sounds great, if you're in hard times, getting $17,000 a year or whatever that some of these tests are doing sounds fantastic. But, what do you do with middle-class folks who are working their butts off, sometimes working 2 and 3 jobs, that are making it but not getting wealthy? And then there's people that are getting free money. There's going to be a lot of anger over that. So I don't know what the real agenda is behind these people suggesting this, but ultimately, I think the vision that people like Jacques Fresco have come up with, where we have a society without government, basically, where things are managed by technology, but where
that's where they want to press things. I don't.
What's that?
Well, that's where they want to take things. You're saying where AI essentially is governing.
Well, not having AI, no, not governing us, no. No, what Jacques Fresco, if for folks that are interested, you can Google the Venus Project, and you can see what Jacques Fresco proposed. And there are lots of YouTube videos of him discussing this, and it's often misunderstood by people. A lot of times people think it means communism or socialism, and that's not at all what he's proposing. And it takes some time to grok what he's really saying, because you have to see the examples and the things that he's envisioned and the models that he's created for it. But basically, that part of the problem that we have and have had our entire history on this planet is that governments always have a lifespan. Governments or like corporations or any entity, they have a lifespan where they evolve, and initially, typically they come out of revolt, and then an order is established, and there's great freedom in the beginning, and then over time that freedom increasingly gets eroded and eroded until the government becomes very corrupt, and basically feeds off of its own people, and then collapses. And that's happened many times throughout history, and it's been going on even in modern times. And some would argue that it's happening right now with the United States and other countries. That remains to be seen. But Jacques Fresco just points out the fundamental flaws why we'll never have an equitable system and a sustainable system as long as we have governments and things structured the way we do. And so his proposal is basically not to have artificial intelligence running things, or not to have people, transhumanist technologies embedded in biological entities or people or whatever, but to have the technologies to be tools for us to use to manage, for example, a city. If you have technology that can manage the power systems of a city and manage air conditioning, manage manage growing food, as Elon Musk and others are pointing out, soon we're going to have robots that can do just about anything that people can do, and do it better and faster. Well, that can go down a very, very negative path. But if we limit it to not creating artificially intelligent machines per se, or a very, very limited type of artificial intelligence that just is a very simple task-based thing, we could utilize that with us being in charge to provide for everybody much more efficiently. For example, if you had, let's say that the government provided cars for everybody to use, or some sort of public transportation other than buses, where individuals can go where they want to go and they leave the cars. Well, you're going to need some kind of a software system to track and manage all of that. And so automation can do that. It's like it's like Uber right now, right? If you're in a city somewhere where there's Uber and you want a car, you get on your phone or a computer, and you get a car there within a few minutes. And that car right now is being provided by an individual who's purchased the car themselves, but at least they're utilizing it more fully. But imagine if, let's say, we collectively bought the cars, then it would be much more efficient. And instead of one individual having to shell out $20,000, $30,000, everybody would just chip in a little bit for the car that they can have access to whenever and wherever. And there's a system that would identify and bring it to you. So those are the kinds of things. It all depends on the intention behind it. And part of the problem is the bigger picture. And to me, the biggest problem that we have on this planet is the mind controlling of the population on this planet. And it goes far beyond just the, human manipulation of human beings. It also involves extraterrestrial manipulation on this planet. And, I've had my own encounters with extraterrestrials. And so I've been shown things that, most people are not privy to. And, and I recognize that nobody can validate that. But now there are, fortunately, people within the space programs, and particularly these secret space programs, who are coming out and telling this tale too of how reptilian extraterrestrials in particular have manipulated our society and other societies around the galaxy to make them fearful and warlike when they're at Stone Age level. One of their modus operandi is to go to Stone Age civilizations and start mind controlling them to be fearful and manipulate them to be fearful, so that as they evolve and develop, they will become warlike, and they will develop war technologies, and eventually those technologies will become sophisticated enough that the reptilians can then come back and trade higher technologies for the manufacturing base of those civilizations in order to make war hardware for space, which is exactly what's going on this planet, and which is what these secret space program people, these whistleblowers like William A. Tompkins, Corey Goode, and others are coming out now. Dr. Stephen Greer, he's had tons of these people working in military contractors and these programs, these secret space programs coming out and giving the details of this stuff, of how this extraterrestrial manipulation. And for people that are not familiar with that, it sounds totally cuckoo. And I get that, but it's the reality, and I wouldn't necessarily believe it myself if I hadn't encountered reptilian extraterrestrials in the physical myself. But that's the reality, and to me, that's the biggest fundamental issue that we have on this planet is the mind control that's going on, because everybody has been programmed to be fearful and to have very limited understanding of their reality, a very limited understanding of their environment, a very limited understanding of themselves, and being constantly distracted with external stimuli and stuff like that. So hardly anybody on this planet goes within and does the inner work, does the spiritual work, investigates the nature of things, and also learns discernment to be able to discern shit from shinola. And so I see a lot of people who don't believe anything because of the intentional obfuscation and mind control that's been going on, particularly on the internet. There's so many lies online, and they're being perpetuated throughout our society, that people either shut down and don't believe anything, or they think everything is a conspiracy. And in my experience, it's somewhere in the middle. But there's the true history of this planet, what's really going on this planet. There are people that know about it, and when you work with these kinds of esoteric things that I have been, you bump into them. But now, fortunately, because of the internet, more and more of these people are coming out and telling their stories, sometimes under threat of death, and sometimes they are killed. Very often they are killed after they come out with their information. I was just a few days ago, I was watching a program on Gaia.com, that's GAIA.com, a show that David Wilcock hosts called Cosmic Disclosure, and he was interviewing a guy he was a medical doctor who had worked in the military for 30 some years, and he had autopsied, he said, thousands of extraterrestrial cadavers and hundreds of different types of extraterrestrials. And he was crying on screen because he said that they'd already tried to kill him for coming out with this stuff, and they showed pictures of his car demolished and stuff. So the stakes are very high to come out with this kind of information, but somebody's got to do it. Otherwise, nothing's going to change on this planet. And things are coming out, things are changing, but people have got to look at, ask themselves, am I mind controlled? Of course, the usual reaction is no. Most people don't want to believe that they're mind controlled, but the truth is we all are. And if you will consider that as a possibility, then you can start investigating, well, how do I break my programming? And there are lots of programs out there to do that, and healing techniques for healing the mind, healing the emotions, and releasing limiting or unconscious beliefs. And that's one of the things I've been teaching for many years.
If we could also speak a bit more on the clearing of radioactivity and geoengineering pollutants from the sky and environment, and the work you've done with technologies related to that. I mean, you mentioned earlier in the show that there are at least 61 patents worldwide, 8 in Japan for neutralizing radioactivity, and examples of it being done now in Fukushima City. Could you speak a little bit more about the technology you've worked with related to this?
Yeah. First of all, for people that want to see those patents, if you go to my website at freshandalive.com, if you go to the resources page, there's a link to a page with a lot of different resources on radiation. And at the top of that page, it has links to the 61 patents. And also it has links and videos of people who have done it. There was, for example, a man named Radha Roy, who was a professor emeritus of physics at Arizona State University. And back in 1975, he developed a technology for neutralizing radioactivity and radioactive waste specifically. And of course, this is a guy with impeccable credentials, and it went nowhere. It was heavily suppressed. And I don't know the story of him and what happened with him, but I'm sure it wasn't pleasant. So there are others, many others that you can see in those patents. Some of them more famous than others, at least in the public eye. But Stanley Meyer, for example, somebody in the comments wanted to talk about Stan Meyer, and we'll talk about him in a moment. But Stanley Meyer developed water field technology as well, and that technology had the capability of neutralizing radioactivity. I knew some people that worked with Stanley directly, so we can talk about that in a minute. But and then I worked, as I mentioned, I worked with Ewell Brown and witnessed using Brown's gas to neutralize the radioactivity. But there are many others. There's Teruo Higa, this Japanese agriculture professor. He is using the effect of microorganisms to spray it on land and break down the nuclear fallout into non-toxic elements very successfully. He's been doing that for a number of years. And he just, like me and other people, he isn't waiting for validation from the scientific community or from legislatures or governments. He's just going out and doing it, and he's proven it. And so that's one of the methods that I use for getting this fallout that's coming down on all of us. And it is coming down on us in some places more so than others, but there are people that are measuring it. Dr. Patrick Flanagan, who's a friend of mine, he has a very expensive, like $20,000 Geiger counter, basically, that can go around and measure this stuff. And he was telling me that that there's large amounts of radioactivity in the atmosphere globally, including the southern hemisphere. A lot of people think that, oh, if I'm down in South America or whatever, it's not so bad. Well, nope, sorry. It's coming down everywhere, and it's showing up in mortality statistics and in some studies. I think in Pennsylvania they did a study on the water systems there and found out that they were high in cesium, radioactive cesium, and then it was directly attributed to higher mortality rates, and they traced it to Fukushima and Chernobyl. Before that, actually, there was Chernobyl had there were studies done on the fallout coming from Chernobyl, and it was tied to millions of deaths around the world in various places. So it's not like we don't have any evidence of this stuff. But so anyway, you can use these microbes to neutralize the fallout on the ground and on your plants or your crops. And in fact, on that radioactivity page on my website, there is a video there of a farmer in Fukushima City who used the effect of microorganisms on his crops and on his soil. And they show, having the government test his produce and his soil, showing no detectable radioactivity when all the farms around him, and this is in Fukushima City, mind you, all the farms around him are massively radioactive and they can't sell their produce, but he can because his produce is not radioactive at all. And so this is the power, and these microbes are dirt cheap too. So this is the truth that that the powers that be don't want out, because it would devastate the nuclear industry and the nuclear control systems, the weapons systems and such. But anybody can use this stuff. It doesn't take a rocket scientist. I have directions for anybody that wants to know how to make this stuff. If you go to my website, there's a hidden page that I give out in interviews. It's downloads with an S, downloads.freshandalive.com. And you can download my instructions for brewing your own probiotic. And that probiotic can be used to clean up all sorts of toxins on your soil and on your garden and on your crops and everything else. So that's a really cheap and inexpensive solution that anybody can use to get this stuff off their food or out of their water. You can use it in ponds and lakes and rivers and such. So you've got that technology. Then for cleaning up these big messes like Chernobyl and Fukushima, we've got a number of these different technologies listed in those patents, including the Brown's gas technology, including Stanley Meyer's technology, and others. We can get it out of our bodies if you've already got it in your body. I know this for a fact because I've gotten poisoned 3 times by radioactivity on my food, probably coming from California, but I'm not sure. But I was actually eating really healthy, and I was eating a big salad that I had made, and I got really ill really quick. And interestingly enough, my wife had some of the same salad and she didn't have any problem. So apparently I picked up a hot particle or two from something I ate, and my gut started burning within an hour. And by the next day, I was seriously ill and really concerned. I didn't know what was going on. I just knew that it was very serious because I'd never felt anything like that before. Because I stay very healthy, I don't. I take care of myself and eat right and detox and stuff. So anyway, normally what I do is get a screening with a device called a QXCI SCIO. For anybody that wants to Google that, that's QXCI SCIO, and generally known as a quantum biofeedback machine. But it's a scalar wave technology, and it can read the vibrational structure of the body. Basically, all matter at its subatomic level, it vibrates, and so every element in the periodic chart has its own unique vibrational frequency at the atomic level. And this is not anything new age. This is like mainstream science. And so this machine can measure and read that frequency and identify the different elements. So for example, hydrogen has a certain frequency, oxygen has a certain frequency, and when you combine, two oxygens and a hydrogen atom, you've got water, and it has an overall resonant frequency you can measure. And so using that concept, this machine can scan the body and examine and see what's in there by looking at the atomic structure and the vibrational frequency of it. And then it can actually send scalar waves of certain frequencies back into the body to help counteract it. And what I discovered was that, as it turned out, I couldn't get a session with my local practitioner for about 5 days because she was booked up. And but it turns out it was kind of a big spirit trick, because I had been testing a new supplement for detoxing the body that are known as nanozeolites. And they're basically, zeolites are a mineral that's created when lava hits water, and it shocks the lava, and it winds up creating these little tiny cages, little molecular sized cages that have a strong charge in them. They will latch onto poisons or free radicals and toxins in the body, or even pathogens in the body when ingested, and pull them out. But these ones, normally those minerals, you get them in powdered form, and they can't circulate everywhere in the body because they're too big. But this company named Coseva, for people that are interested, that's COSEVA. Coseva developed a product called Advanced TRS, where they use vitamin C to break the minerals down into the individual little cages. These little cages are like little atomic scale geodesic balls. And so when they get them into that small individual cage size, they're small enough to go anywhere in the body that water can go. So I had been testing these things for a couple of weeks, taking them every day. And fortunately, that's what saved me. When I finally did get this session, I was starting to get on the uptick with it. I was starting to feel a little bit better after being very ill. And then when I got the session, it was showing gamma and beta and alpha radiation damage in my gut, which is exactly what you would see from nuclear radiation. But fortunately, the particles were gone. Apparently, the zeolites flushed them on out of me, and so it didn't do a horrific amount of damage. And then the machine itself was able to send scalar waves in the anti-frequencies of the radioactive elements and help neutralize and heal up the the remaining radioactivity. And then within a few days of that, I discovered a supplement that will remove radioactivity from the body, which unfortunately right now is kind of in flux. The co-developers of the formula have gotten into a squabble, and they're kind of working it out. So right now, I was carrying it. It was a product called Rad Detox, but it's no longer on my website. But hopefully we'll have a replacement for it soon. But at any rate, I used these supplements in this device and was able to neutralize it, get it out of my body, and everything was fine. And so that set me on a path of discovering how to remove radiation from the body. And initially it took me about 10 days to get it all resolved, and then it happened again, and it happened again several months later. And the second time it took about 5 days to get rid of it, and the third time it took about 3 days to get rid of it. So the bottom line is that ideally what we want to be doing is detoxing on a daily basis anyway, because our environment has become so toxic and people are accumulating toxins of all kinds. So we really need to be ingesting ideally food-based supplements and things, herbs and foods that will pull these things out. And there are clays that will pull out some of these radioactive elements, the ones that are what are called the transuranic elements and radioactive isotopes that are too large. Their particles are too large for zeolites to grab onto and pull them out of the body. But fortunately, those particles stay in the gut. They don't circulate into other parts of the body. So you can actually use clays or absorbers like food-grade charcoal or apple pectin. There are a lot of herbs. Turns out there are a lot of herbs and foods that will pull these things out of the gut. Bentonite clay. I use a clay called sacred clay from Vitality Clay and Herbs. Food-grade charcoal also will do it. And so between the nanozeolites and ingesting these clays, if you do it on a daily basis, then you don't really have to worry about this because it will, if it gets in you, it'll just get pulled out immediately. And then there are a lot of, as it turns out, there's a lot of foods and herbs that will help pull radiation out of the body as well. Ashwagandha, chlorophyll in general, chlorella, liposomal vitamin C. There are quite a few foods that will remove the stuff from the body. So you can get it out of the body, you can get it out of your environment, you can get it out of your water. And so you can maintain your health and not have to worry about this stuff. Now, I also developed a device in 2012 that when, and I guess it was March of 2011 when the Fukushima disaster occurred. And because I had already worked with Chernobyl victims, I had helped a couple of Chernobyl victims that had been severely damaged from radiation poisoning. One was a quadriplegic, one was a paraplegic. And just by using detoxification and dense nutrients in the body, they were able to regenerate their cells, get rid of the radioactivity and the damage, and heal up and return to normal motor function and muscle function. And so I knew how to do that, but so because I was familiar with studying the effects from Chernobyl, I already knew what was headed our way when the Fukushima disaster occurred. So I figured it'd be just a few weeks before it was hitting California, and sure enough, within 2 or 3 weeks, it was showing up in California. And so I went online to Google to see if anybody was using scalar energy technology to neutralize radioactivity, because since I was manufacturing scalar technologies and I had worked with people that were familiar with scalar technologies, I knew that you could neutralize radioactivity with scalar wave devices. And I found out, in fact, that there were people doing that. And so since I was already manufacturing scalar wave technology with a device called the Rest Shield, which is a little small pyramid device that puts out a scalar field and helps with sleep, I figured, well, let me see if I can adapt this technology and maybe help neutralize radioactivity. And so I spent about 1.5 years experimenting with it and hardly slept and ate and was just really wore myself out. But I did finally come up with a solution in a small device about the size of a 2-gallon bucket that will clear a 75-mile radius of all air pollution, whether it's radioactivity or geoengineering pollutants or just good old-fashioned, air pollution from everything else. And it worked better than my wildest dreams, and it will clear a 75-mile radius of this stuff. And it doesn't drop it down on the Earth. It actually sends it out into space by creating a giant scalar wave vortex, which is basically this superluminal light energy that I've been talking about. It can create and alter matter, as it turns out. And in this form, it creates kind of like an upside down tornado, and the point of the tornado is out in space. And so it acts like a vacuum cleaner, and it just sucks pollution out of the atmosphere. But because it's designed to operate at natural frequencies, something called the Schumann resonance, which is a natural pulsing in the Earth's atmosphere. It also uses minerals to set frequencies that are natural frequencies. it will only pull pollutants out. It doesn't modify the weather. It doesn't alter or damage anything. It has no negative side effects. But when you pull the pollution out of the atmosphere, what happens is it balances the electric charge in the atmosphere, and then because of that, you get normal weather for your area. So what we've seen in placing these things in various places is it will stop hurricanes, it will stop tornadoes, it will stop severe weather of all kinds, droughts, floods, you name it. It just, whatever your normal weather is for your area, that's what you wind up getting. And it also reduces lightning, because lightning and tornadoes and hurricanes and all these severe weather, this is nature trying to clean itself up and balance itself. Hurricanes and tornadoes are very cleansing for the earth. But, if the earth was clean, if we were using sustainable technologies and clean technologies, you wouldn't have so many of these, these severe storms and weather. And then, of course, you also have geoengineering going on. So there are people dumping tons and tons of these metal aerosols into the atmosphere all around the globe. And this is not at all a conspiracy theory, by the way. Anybody that thinks it's a conspiracy theory, just Google geoengineering. You'll see Harvard University and Oxford University have degree programs in it now. But
I've had multiple sources claiming that they've identified, for example, with the Morgellons, which you mentioned with the illicit diseases there in some of your notes. Morgellons has been identified as having some of the same components as what they've sampled from a lot of these chemtrails in the atmospheres. And what's really interesting about the Morgellons. I've heard reports that, well, of course, they're finding fibers that are growing, what seem like fibers growing out of the people, but it's a cross-domain bacteria, plant and animal combination of sorts, a hybrid of sorts. And there's also a lot of claims of associating nanotechnology related to the Morgellons and or the geoengineering. Do you know? Have you heard anything related to the nanotechnology related to any of this?
Oh yeah, most certainly. Because I encounter people in these, like the NSA and the military from time to time, they will admit that they know that this is going on. And who's really in charge of it or who's behind it is hard to say. I mean, certainly the military is involved, because at least in some of it, because you can, for example, go online and Google owning the weather by 2025, and you can see you can download a 57-page research paper that the Air Force did to study controlling the weather, and they make no bones about it. They want to control the weather by 2025. They state it globally, not just in the United States. The United States military and Air Force wants to control the weather globally by 2025. So you've got that, but there are also probably these super governmental corporate conglomerates that have developed out of World War II. Some of the military contractors that provided the war technologies for World War II developed huge amounts of money and of course the weaponry, and so they developed a lot of power, and to the point where they now have created conglomerates amongst themselves that are more powerful than even the United States government. And so they have been involved in secret space programs and all kinds of stuff. So I think some of this geoengineering or chemtrailing, whatever you want to call it, I think some of it is probably being done by some of these super governmental organizations that are not, they're not reporting to anybody in our government. Stephen Greer has, Dr. Stephen Greer has pointed out that there are a bunch of very high-level people, like at the top levels of the military, that are not read into this stuff, and they were incensed, and when they tried to get read into it, were told they couldn't have access. So, all of this nonsense we've been taught about, that, the President of the United States is the most powerful man in the world, and he's in charge of the military and all that kind of stuff, is nonsense. It's not true. But at any rate, there are people like Clifford Carnicom and Dr. Len Horowitz and others who have been doing the science on these and showing what's showing up in these aerosols and things that are being sprayed, and it's coming down in rainwater. People can test it themselves. They don't necessarily have to take our word for it. You can take rainwater and test it and see what's in it.
Absolutely, yeah. I've been very impressed with the videos from Clifford Carnicom and the Carnicom Institute and their website. Yeah, I would love to hear from him, to have him on sometime. I know he's pretty busy, but yeah, I'd love to get him for an interview as well.
Yeah. I've worked with people, I've helped several people that had Morgellons disease heal it, and so I'm familiar with that as well. And it's like you said, these are what happens with people that suffer from Morgellons. First of all, if people aren't familiar with it, they wind up getting, these people break out with lesions all over their body, really nasty sores and lesions, and they wind up growing these filaments that look kind of like fishing string that grow up out of the tissue, and they can be red or blue or different colors. And of course, when they're examined by conventional doctors, they don't know what it is, because they're not even thinking that this is a genetically engineered microbe that's causing it. It's actually a cross between a fungus and a bacteria, a GMO cross, and they call them cross-domain organisms. But they're, it's part of biowarfare technology that's being experimented on around the world. Populations have historically been experimented on by our military and other militaries. It's nothing new. It's actually happened for thousands of years. It's just gotten more sophisticated now, and perhaps a little more covert. But so in my experience working with Morgellons sufferers, usually what happens with them is they are eating a diet that's very acidifying to the body, that's very high in starches and sugars and carbs, the typical American diet. They're basically doing all the wrong things, and then they get exposed to it somehow, very often working outdoors, maybe gardening or something like that. They may even have a break in their skin, and because this stuff comes down, it lands in the soil and it sits there. And then if you've got an open cut or something on you, where you get cut when you've got soil on you, then you can get the stuff in you. So you kind of create the perfect storm for this stuff to grow inside of a human body. And so the way to deal with that is by getting on a diet that doesn't feed the organism, which means no sugars, no starches, no refined carbs, nothing that converts to sugar in the body, no alcohol, no bread, no pasta, no pastries, that kind of stuff. And you get them on a high chlorophyll live food diet, and you detox them heavily with herbs and food-based supplements. And there are silver products, like the one I use is called accelerated silver, that is a monatomic silver that's really effective for killing off pathogens in the body. And I also use chlorine dioxide. There's some people may have heard of MMS, or Miracle Mineral Solution. There's a variation of that called CDS, chlorine dioxide solution, and that's what I use. Has a much better taste than MMS, but that stuff is phenomenal at killing off pathogens in the body. So a combination of not feeding these bugs with diet, and then detoxifying them, killing them off in the body, and then the Morgellons will go away. And I've had a couple of cases like that years ago that were able to get rid of it that way. But when it gets heavily entrenched in the body, it can take time. And it can take more effort. I also will use for hard cases, I will use something called a parasite zapper, which is a little electronic device that's like a little box that has two electrodes on it that are shaped like maybe about the size of a penny, and you put it up against the body, and it puts out a square wave pulse signal, electric signal. It's very weak, but that signal, it's basically the electricity shutting on and off really fast and hard, and it shocks the parasites and pathogens. They can't handle it, and it'll help kill them off. So when I've had tough cases like Morgellons clients, I've used everything I've got, everything for killing off pathogens and diet and detoxification. And it can take sometimes a year for people to really resolve it. But, one of the things I'm very fond of saying is, when people hear all this stuff, they start getting depressed because, like, oh my God, I don't want to live in a world where all these horrible things are going on. But the good news is that we always have solutions for this stuff, and we always will, because the one major trump card that we have is that consciousness creates reality. And, you don't necessarily have to take my word for that, but if you start examining your beliefs and examining the beliefs of others and start looking at, what they're creating in their lives, you will see, as I did years ago, when I started kind of empirically studying myself and other people, that whatever we believe is exactly what we get. So understanding that we create our reality, then the polarities of this scalar energy of consciousness that creates these problems, it always has an opposite polarity simultaneously. You can't have plus charge without minus charge. And same thing with this. You cannot have scalar frequencies of consciousness creating these problems without the scalar frequencies of consciousness simultaneously in the opposite polarities creating solutions. So there's always some brilliant person around or something that is creating a solution for this stuff. And all we have to do is look around instead of getting into victimhood and use the great Oracle Google or YouTube or whatever, or intention to find a solution. And if you start focusing on that, you will draw it to yourself and you will find the solution.
Absolutely. I noticed you were mentioning water purification as well, creating living water that is not only non-toxic but healing. If you could elaborate on that a bit.
Sure. And this kind of ties in a little bit with Stanley Meyer. Stanley Meyer was another person who developed water fuel technology in the 80s. And I've met some people that worked with him directly, and I've heard stories firsthand about what really went down with Stanley Meyer. Water fuel technology has been around since the 1800s, and William Rose probably is the one responsible for its current incarnation back in the 60s when he developed his water fuel welder, because Yul Brown and a man named Andrija Puharich, who was a really brilliant scientist, they both, I believe, they probably got their ideas from William Rhodes, and they both developed water fuel technologies. Andrija Puharich developed a water fuel car in the 70s, but it was my understanding that he was friends with the Rockefeller family, and they advised him not to develop it or he would get hurt, so he didn't. And then Brown developed his, and then Stanley Meyer also developed his in the 80s. And Stanley Meyer went very public with it at the time. He was getting on television and stuff, and he had a lot of scientists and engineers working with him, showing what it was doing. So he had a fair amount of credibility with it. And but he was keeping some of the secrets of how it worked to himself, and which is very, very dangerous, because if you don't share everything you know with as many people as you can, you're probably going to get whacked. And ultimately, unfortunately, that's what happened to Stanley. He had signed a $30 million contract to provide water fuel technology to the U.S. military to power all their vehicles. And within a few minutes of signing that contract, he was dead. Apparently was at a Cracker Barrel restaurant, and he was with his brother, and when he got out to the parking lot, he just collapsed over and started dying and told his brother that they poisoned him. So, and then of course the people that worked with him also were poisoned. I was told that everybody, if most, if not everybody that worked with him got poisoned, and several of them did get killed. But one of the interesting side effects of Stanley Meyer's implementation was that you could use polluted water, you could use muddy water, you could use salt water, you could use any kind of water. And his fuel cell would extract the water out of everything that was in it and turn it into this gas, which is basically HHO, and leave all the pollutants behind. And the cool thing is that you could then take the HHO gas and burn the pollutants with it, and it would alter them at the atomic level and make them non-toxic. You could turn them into non-toxic elements. And so Stanley was doing that, and he also, well, apparently, because of that, you could purify water with it, including purifying radioactive water. And so ultimately when he was killed, his brother wound up going to Canada with the technology, and last I heard, he was using it, he was selling it up there as water purification technology. And I know somebody in Canada came out with a Brown's gas generator a few years ago, and it went nowhere fast, unfortunately. I couldn't believe that they announced it before they actually were ready to ship the product, and then the next thing you know, it wasn't shipping. So, but at any rate, so Stanley Meyer developed a method for water purification, and water, of course, is very, very important to us because our bodies are primarily made of water, but not many people really understand, even people working with water purification technologies, they don't really understand what water is and how it works and what we have to do to make it healthy water when we purify it. And so, what most people do, I mean, if you're looking at like cities and municipalities, what they do is basically try to filter it and then chemically treat it. And of course, they don't have the ability to get everything out of it. And then, of course, the chemicals they put in it to disinfect it, like chlorine and chloramines, are very toxic carcinogens. And so their whole process makes very toxic water. But it turns out there was a man named Victor Schauberger, and there have been other people who have studied water, but Schauberger, I think, is probably where most of the modern knowledge about the real intricacies of water is coming from. Schauberger was a naturalist living in Austria in the early 1900s and studied nature, and he had a brilliant mind and figured out a lot of stuff, free energy technologies and all kinds of things. But he also studied water intently and figured out a lot of things about water. And he realized that, when you purify water, you can't just filter it and be done with it because, number one, filtration damages water. Pressurization damages water. Heating water damages it. There are lots of things that damage water, exposing it to chemicals, exposing it to materials like plastic or metal. Pretty much all the things that we're doing to water damage it. And it damages it in some interesting and unique ways. Water is a liquid crystal. And so water molecules, when they're in healthy natural water, they like to grab onto each other into groups of 6. And if you could look at water at the atomic level or at the molecular level and see what was going on, what you would see is that these molecules, like I say, they will grab onto each other if it's healthy water in a groups of 6, and then they let go and they grab onto another set of 6. And so it's kind of like this square dance where, individual water molecules are doing this do-si-do with five other water molecules for just a microsecond, billionth of a second, and then they let go and grab onto another one. But they're doing this so fast, it's kind of like if you could set a strobe light watching people in a disco, with a strobe light, you can see their movements in kind of, in jerky form. If you could hit it with a strobe light, what you would see is that these molecules, even though they're grabbing onto each other, these water molecules, even though they're grabbing onto each other very quickly and letting go, overall, they form patterns when they're doing this. And if it's healthy water, they will form these 6-sided clusters, which is known as, water clustering. And they will also create other macroscopic patterns in the collection. And when living organisms ingest that kind of water, if it's healthy water, those patterns will trigger a healing response in the body. That's the whole basis of homeopathy. Homeopathy is this concept of taking water and putting a material into it like a flower or an herb, and then diluting it while you percuss it, which just means you physically shock it with by kind of hitting it, striking it, and percussing with pressure. And you do that over and over again. You dilute it, and you percuss it, and dilute it, percuss it over and over again until chemically there's no longer any of the material detectable in the water. And yet, what that does is it allows that clustering pattern to remain intact in the water. And then when you ingest that material or that water, it will trigger a specific type of healing response. And so there's a man named Bach and others who understood this, and they developed homeopathic remedies that will help with healing in various ways by using that concept. So Schauberger understood this. Other people now have come to understand this. And when you send water through natural processes like the hydrological cycle of the earth, where water is evaporating, it's going up into the sky, It's being exposed to all kinds of cosmic radiation, solar radiation, lightning, the sounds of thunder, and we're assuming, again, in a natural, clean environment, if that existed anymore. Then it, condenses back down in the form of rain, and it flows across plants, and plants are, they are scalar wave antennas. They're basically, not only are they collecting solar radiation, photonic solar radiation that we're familiar with from the sun, but they're also collecting scalar waves from the sun and from other places in the galaxy and converting it directly into matter. Plants are energy to matter converters. Plants are matter to energy converters, and we're the opposite. We're energy to matter converters. I'm screwing up here. Plants are energy to matter converters. Humans are matter to energy converters. We eat matter and convert it into energy. Plants eat a little bit of matter in the form of minerals and water and a few gases, but primarily they're converting scalar waves and solar energy into matter. So they are actually scalar wave antennas. They're fractal antennas that reach down into the soil, and they pick up the energies and the frequencies of the scalar energy coming from the center of the planet, because the Earth has a singularity at its center. And that energy is, the frequencies are modulated by the crystals in the soil, because crystals are oscillators. This is very common in electronics and in mainstream science. It's known that when you send energy through crystals in one frequency, they'll come out the crystal the other side with a different frequency depending on what crystal you're using. So you've got all these energies being created within soil, and the plants reach their roots, which is an antenna structure down in the soil, energizing all this water and nutrients they're taking up and bringing it into the plant. And then the same thing, the plant's reaching up into the sky and collecting all this scalar energy and solar energy from the sun and imbuing from each side, imbuing it down into the earth and imbuing it up into the atmosphere and into the local environment around the plant. So when this rainwater washes down across those plants, it's picking up these scalar frequencies and structuring the water in a beneficial way. And then it goes down into the soil and it passes through the soil and across the roots. It's picking up those scalar energies coming off of those minerals and off the plant roots there as well, and imparting some very beneficial homeopathic frequencies and structuring that water clustering. So it's very complex what's going on here with natural water in that sense. And then you've also got in flowing bodies of water like rivers and creeks and streams, you have all of these rocks in the beds of the rivers and creeks and streams, and also the mud that is high in these monoatomic elements, and they are emitting scalar waves because that's one of the things that they do. They're picking it up from the earth and the sun and rebroadcasting it. So you got this water flowing over all these rocks, and if it's in a typical riverbed or a stream bed where there's a lot of rocks, then you've got that creating a lot of eddies and vortexes, and that vortexing action within scalar fields and magnetic fields that are created with some of the minerals. All of that will structure the water homeopathically, and it will also break the minerals down into angstrom and monoatomic particles that the body can absorb. And then also in the soil, the microbes in the soil will break the minerals down into monoatomics and angstrom particles that the plants can uptake. So plants are kind of like these natural filters for us that, that deliver all of these nutrients and minerals in a form that our bodies can use. But because there's also photosynthesis going on and all of this complex energetics, you're ingesting an energy system as well, particularly if you're eating live food. If you're eating cooked dead food, you're not getting that. But if you're eating living food, which is why living food's so healing, you're getting this quantum process, this quantum energetic process that's going on. Photosynthesis is very much an interdimensional quantum process. It's bringing in so-called zero-point energy into the system in the process of photosynthesis. So you got this very complex energetic going on with all of this, with water and the fluids in plants. So if you're talking about water purification, you can't just filter the water. You've got to filter the water and chemically clean it up, get the pollutants out of it, but then you've got to restructure it homeopathically. And you've got to put these monoatomic elements back into it, which is in all natural waters, in the ground and in flowing bodies of water. And there's only one water purification system that I know of that actually does all that and puts the monoatomics back into the water. And that is the Miracule water system, which people can check out at miraculewater.com. That's MIRACULE water.com.
And your other website is still freshandalive.com, correct?
Correct. Yeah, my main website is freshandalive.com, and I'm on Facebook and my blog where I have a lot of videos and information about this kind of stuff. That is freshandaliveblog.com.
Great.
And I'm also on YouTube. I got tons of YouTube videos out there.
So all this information about living water, Scalar, it really makes me also and then the programming you mentioned from past forms to bring back the heirloom DNA of the plant, of the organism. It's actually reaching from the past for that memory. It makes me wonder about all of the portions of the DNA strand that supposedly are shrugged off as redundant, because we don't understand it, right?
Well, exactly. I was told by reptilian ETs directly, and I know this sounds nutty, but it's the truth, that the so-called junk DNA that our scientists call junk DNA is actually parts of the DNA that were unplugged by reptilian master geneticists to control us. And there's a long story behind that, but basically that was what junk DNA is. And actually, there's a Russian scientist, brilliant guy named Dr. Alexander Golod, Golod. Folks want to look him up. And he was building pyramids. Now, this is a guy with impeccable credentials. He was a high-level physicist working in the Russian military, high ranking, and he had access to a lot of top secret technologies and stuff. And when the Cold War lessened, he started studying pyramids. Probably the Russian military was probably interested in them for weaponry, but he was studying them, and being a very benevolent guy, he studied their benefits and found tons of amazing benefits, which, if you go to the resources page on my website, you can see some of that information. But one of the really, really interesting ones that he discovered was that he built this large 144-foot tall pyramid outside of Moscow, which unfortunately got blown away last June in some kind of a freak wind, which probably was engineered, but that's another story. But at any rate, he built this large pyramid outside of Moscow. They were finding all kinds of amazing healing properties with it. But they noticed in the fields growing around it, they had all these flowers growing that no one had ever seen before. So they called in a botanist and had them identify it. Turns out they've been extinct on Earth for 11 million years. So he showed that we can actually bring back extinct species potentially with pyramids. Just skater wave technology.
I'd love to have you back to talk about that and more of these topics. Thank you so much for being with us. We ran out of time.
Oh, my pleasure, Richard.
Well, have a great evening. Thank you.
You too. Thanks so much.
Gives us one side of World War II. They don't want us to know the real history of what happened over 70 years ago, seeing through the eyes of the German victims. The horror of the terror bombing, the mass rape of millions of women and children, the torture and murder of civilians, the death camps for surrendered soldiers, the ethnic cleansing of whole countries, and the planned extermination of the entirety of the German people. After watching Hellstorm, you'll never see the good war and the good guys in the same light ever again. Watch for free and get DVDs at hellstormdocumentary.com.